welcome to EHA Unplugged, the official podcast channel of the European Hematology Association, EHA.
Hello, I am Isabel Olivera, a medical writer for EHA. Today, we have the pleasure of interviewing Jan Geissler, a patient advocate and social entrepreneur who has made significant contributions to the field of hematology and patient advocacy. Jan Geissler was diagnosed with chronic myelocytic leukemia, CML, in 2001 at the age of 28, which became the catalyst for his journey into patient advocacy. Since then, he has co-founded several patient advocacy organizations, including Leukanet, the European Cancer Patient Coalition, the CML Advocates Network, and Patvocates, a think tank and consultancy on patient advocacy and patient engagement. Jan Geissler is also actively involved in EHA as a member of Patient Advocacy Committee, PAC. So in this episode, we'll explore how EHA can support patient advocates and how patient advocates, in turn, can contribute to the work of hematologists. Thank you for being with us today, Jan.
Thank you so much for having me.
So could you start by sharing with us your personal journey from being diagnosed with CML to becoming a prominent patient advocate?
Yeah, sure. I was diagnosed, as you said, with chronic myeloid leukemia in 2001 at the age of 28, just a couple of years after my study. And I was working in technology and innovation management, so nothing related to medicine. I had no idea. And actually, the outlook at that time was not very good. So the therapies on the market at that time were actually giving me a 50-50 chance to survive. So then I found a publication here at ASH, actually many, many years ago, where they were discussing phase 3 data of a new drug, which is now imatinib. And it was an investigation at that time, but it was not available. So I actually found out about it and then found one of the lead authors of the publication here was actually a physician investigator for Mannheim, and he actually offered me a phase 1, phase 2 trial with 2 investigational agents. So I joined the clinical study, and actually that's why I'm here today. So that was probably my journey into it, and because I had the privilege to speak English well, so I could actually access English language publications. And then I started to translate abstracts into German and publish that on the internet, that actually other Germans have also the chance to understand what was going on in science. And that's how I slipped into patient advocacy. I actually never had the idea or the plan to be in medicine or patient advocacy, but life takes you to, let's say, unknown directions sometimes. And then I really got involved. I got more and more involved. I met other patient advocates with a similar mission. We set up a patient organization on the European level to talk about policy and to be at the table when the European Commission was discussing about new proposal for legislation. And I also started to build international networks to connect organizations like my German organization. And we started to share best practice and develop joint trainings. And that's how it all happened. It wasn't planned, but it was very exciting.
So you have transitioned from a career in media and technology. How have your previous experiences contributed to your work today as a patient advocate?
Well, it's been extremely helpful because in the job that I was working innovation and technology management. So I was working with a lot of startups that were actually building new business models, new media, things like that. In that kind of time of the early 2000s, there were a lot of innovation coming to the media industry. So when I worked with the startups, I actually learned a lot about growing smaller organizations, about the challenges of growth that small organizations had. And actually what I learned is that the process that startups go through are very related to what grassroots patient advocacy groups go through. So in the end, of course, patient organizations serve a different goal. They have societal goals. They want to make a difference for patients. But in the end, the process of setting up an organization, of growing it, of micromanagement, of trying to detach yourself from doing everything yourself, trying to build teams, I learned a lot from that. And I must say that helped me a lot in building patient organizations and trying to also grow them to a level where the founders were no longer the ones doing everything, but building a team and working with others in collaboration. I worked in an English language company, and that has helped me a great deal because advocacy was far advanced in the US and UK at that time. So I learned a lot and got to know other people that were doing similar things, but were probably some years ahead of us, like the HIV community, because they've done patient advocacy 20 years before the cancer community really thought about it. And so we used a lot what they'd created, and we redid that in hematology and oncology, which was really cool.
So you have founded Patvocates. It's a think tank and consultancy in patient advocacy. What can you tell us about this?
Well, Patvocates was actually set up as a think tank because I got involved in so many different activities on patient engagement. And as a patient and patient advocate, I sat in a lot of steering committees and advisory boards and things like that. But very often there were tick box exercises. They were not really targeted to having a meaningful conversation about what really mattered to the patient community. And everybody was talking about patient centricity, but it was a bit like, the patient's in the middle, so he's standing in everyone's way. So from that perspective, I wanted to change that. And Patvocates was set up because we wanted to build on that experience and help both the nonprofit sector, so the patient organizations, to work more effectively with researchers, with clinicians, with medical societies, with pharma. And we wanted to help other healthcare stakeholders to engage in a meaningful way with the patient community. And over the years, there were a lot of methodologies developed by the European Patients Academy or by PFMD and others. But methodology is one thing, applying that in practice is a different thing. And this is why we set up Patvocates, to actually put in practice and help people on real projects, on real development, on real clinical trials, to make patient engagement a reality and really talk about substantial input that the patient community can contribute before decisions are taken on clinical trial protocol designs, on the choice of patient-reported outcome instruments and things like that. So the patients have a lot to contribute in the definition phase of research. And that's what we want to help with Patvocates. We want to make sure this happens and that both sides, both the patient community and the other healthcare stakeholders, really know how to work with each other.
So you were also the director of EUPATI. Are you still involved in it? Can you explain what EUPATI is and does?
Well, EUPATI, or the European Patients Academy, was actually an IMI project. One of my first consultancy jobs when I founded Patvocates was actually that somebody approached me and say, there's a new call by IMI, by the Innovative Medicines Initiative, which is a huge public-private partnership of the European Commission and industry to actually fund research. And there was a call on educating the patient community about how research and development and how regulatory affairs work. And so a forming consortium was actually asking me, can you help us submit that grant proposal to the European Commission? We had a forming consortium of 30 different organizations. And I was actually coordinating to the submission of that proposal. And we won the bid. And in the end, I was asked to actually coordinate that IMI project. So the European Patients Academy, or EUPATI, was set up to train the patient community about how R&D works. So we developed an internet toolbox, which is something like a Wikipedia on drug development. So in lay terms, where patient advocates and patients can understand how drug development works, the different phases of clinical trials, pharmacovigilance, regulatory processes, personalized medicine, all these buzzwords that we hear everywhere, but we need to know how that works if we want to engage with everyone who's running trials or developing new therapies or assessing new drugs in a regulatory setting. So that's what we did. And we also developed a patient expert training course where patient advocates can actually take an intense training about all these processes. And this is not only e-learning, but it's face-to-face meetings as well, where patients can, for example, in a mock ethics committee training, take roles and understand what's their role in such a committee. How can they actually contribute in a meaningful way? That's what we did with EUPATI. I'm no longer deeply involved now, so after 6 years, I passed it on to my successor. But I'm still involved here and there, and it has become much stronger. And it's usually these EU projects, it's very hard to sustain them after public funding runs out. But EUPATI has been successful in having a sustainability strategy and is today stronger than ever, with support from different stakeholders being involved in EU projects and getting support from pharma and from all different kinds of sources. So it's become a very strong platform for patient education when they want to be partners in research.
Could you highlight what are the most important ways in which patient advocates can help?
In terms of research, patients can help in defining clinical trials. So it's the whole process from actually defining the research goals and the research question. Because very often we talk about unmet need, but we often talk about unmet clinical needs. So what the clinicians think is the important thing or what people in industry think. But the unmet patient need might be something very different. They might, for example, not prioritize survival or longevity of survival, but they might also look at quality of life, might have other topics that they really struggle with. And that's why discussing the unmet need and the research question is very important. And then if we think about the definition of a clinical trial protocol, there's a lot when we discuss about inclusion-exclusion criteria, if we discuss about the choice of patient-reported outcome measures to measure quality of life, or mobility aspects that patients from remote locations can actually get to the trial center, maybe supported by a carer if they need. And those are the conversations we often have in the definition phase of clinical studies. And patients have a very unique perspective on that because they have their skin in the game. They know what counts. They know what the challenges are. And they also know why patients do not join studies or why they drop off halfway through because they say, I can't deal with the study burden. I need to get on with my life. And we're trying to avoid these situations because research that doesn't deliver results, it's not worth it. And that's why we're very interested to work very early on that. That's what patients can do. And that's also what EUPATI actually trained about. Because, of course, we need to have these knowledgeable advocates which understand how clinical trials work. And usually, like myself, they have no medical background. So they need to learn the methodology or at least a bit of that to contribute in a meaningful way.
Most clinical trials are organized by pharma. Are they listening? Do they understand these very important contributions that patients can do?
I think they increasingly understand. When we started with EUPATI in 2012, industry was, of course, part of that project. But I would say there was no standard operating procedure. There was no process. There was no internal understanding of how to systematically involve patients. It happened here and there, and more in HIV because the community did a lot, and a lot in a couple of indications like breast cancer where the communities were very strong. But it wasn't really established in a systematic way. And this has changed a lot over the last 10, 12 years. So the methodologies, tools, and frameworks are there to involve, and more companies have established patient engagement, patient advocacy departments where they have defined the process how to liaise with the patient community, and also all the codes to actually safeguard their independence and make sure that the patient community brings in their opinion but is not unduly influenced by industry. So I think a lot has happened over the past years. If you ask me, are we there yet? We're not there yet. So it's still a long way to go because it happens here and there. And the pace in which industry or different companies are implementing patient engagement processes is different. So some are advanced, some still struggle, some have built centralized departments which look at the whole drug development life cycle end to end. And they are leading the way. And we can, in the meantime, see that it translates into numbers. So there are metrics to measure that there's a benefit in involving patients because you save a lot of protocol amendments. You'd probably accelerate recruitment because you get inclusion criteria right, or the study burden and all the patient information. We've come quite some way, but we're probably at, I don't know, let me judge, probably 30-40% of where we want to be. So there's still work for us.
have you seen a big evolution in what patients are able to do in these committees or when they are given a chance?
Yeah, absolutely. Because when I started in 2001, I mean, I had no idea about patient advocacy and so on. And I had to learn it the hard way, how advocacy works, how research works, and so on. And over the years, with EUPATI, we have developed structured training programs. So we were just a couple of people. We were pretty alone in hematology and oncology to drive forward patient engagement. But today, we have hundreds of Jans. We've trained up a whole community. I mean, if you look at oncology, hematology, there are probably about 230 different cancers. There are dozens of hematological non-malignant diseases. And of course, every community needs knowledgeable patient advocates. So I think a lot has happened over time to actually contribute in a meaningful way. When I started to liaise with EHA in 2010 with Uli Jäger, the incoming president at that time, we were taking very cautious steps in bringing the patient voice into the EHA Congress. The board was quite divided about this, whether it's a good idea in a scientific congress to have patients, and have them contribute to sessions. So we took baby steps, and then we started a session. In the next year, we had 2 sessions. In the next year, we had a track. Then we established the patient organizations work group, or EHA did that. And over the years, we did more and more in collaboration. And that kind of trajectory that we had with EHA shows also the development that patient engagement had over the years. Today, I'm as an observer in the scientific program committee, so I can bring suggestions of patient advocates that can be, for example, act as speakers or as co-chairs of sessions, and we can shape up the program that also hematologists see what are the crucial things for the patient community, how can they tailor their research more towards patients' needs. And I think we're a very good place today, and EHA has been a pioneer in this and getting patients engaged in the medical society. So that's very exciting.
So you're talking about your work in the PAC, the Patients Advocacy Committee in EHA. What other activities does this committee have? What do they do exactly?
Well, the PAC has a lot of activities in EHA because we contribute to different committees. On one hand, the PAC meets to discuss, for example, some of the sessions that are held at EHA Congress, if they're, for example, covering policy topics. But we also have representatives in the European Affairs Committee. So we discuss quite a lot about policy positions that EHA develops together with the different societies and internally, because there's a lot of discussion going on, for example, about bureaucracy in clinical trials and others. And the PAC members contribute a lot to that. We have, I think, about 16 organizations in the PAC now. The different communities, of course, have different perspectives. They're large and smaller. They are more rare or more common. They cover non-malignant and malignant hematology. They are from diverse backgrounds. And the PAC is that kind of committee where we bring in all the different perspectives and try to support EHA in getting those kind of needs of the patient community into the different committees. So we've been contributing to the IR task force now. We've contributed to the scientific program committee. We have contributed to different scientific working groups of EHA. So the PAC is kind of a central focal point to bring the different patient umbrella organizations together to feed into the different activities that the society has. And it has been a very trustful and open and great collaboration over the years.
So you have a very long experience now in this field. From your perspective, what are the most pressing issues that EHA should address to advance the patient voice and in hematology?
If you look at just malignant hematology, our key problem is still survival in many of these diseases. But if we're all as successful as we all wish for, that survival is no longer our main enemy, then it is a question of not how long we survive, but it will be the main question is how we survive. So the whole topic of cancer survivorship and long-term toxicity and optimizing quality of life, or living with cancer or living with a non-malignant disease becomes a key focal point. There's been a scientific working group on that, but we still see that everything at the moment, both in industry as well as in the clinical community, is focused around prolonging survival and clinical endpoints. And patients are the best experts in survivorship and quality of life. They can help clinical researchers to choose the right instruments to measure what is a meaningful difference, and to actually look at that kind of essential triangle of the right measures of toxicity, the right measures of quality of life or patient-reported outcomes, and the right measures for patient preferences to understand, so how does toxicity influence patients? How does it influence quality of life? And what kind of different domains are really relevant in terms of living with cancer or non-malignant hematological diseases? I think the patient community can really contribute a lot. It can help also EHA in focusing on that and making sure we get this right in upcoming clinical trials.
What do you hope to see happen in the maybe 10 future years to help patients' involvement in EHA? What do you want to happen?
What I would really like to see is that any research in the definition and design phase actually has meaningful patient input, because we can see the value of it. We can see it generates better studies, it generates better outcomes, it accelerates research, it overcomes burden in terms of bureaucracy and regulatory questions, and it also increases patient access later on, because further down the line, treatments only work if they get into patients, so it doesn't help if we design the best studies, but in the end, the EMA or the health technology assessment bodies don't understand the data, or they don't think there's value in it. And that's why I think it's essential to have patients involved before decisions are being made, before the protocols are being finalized, before the studies are being started, or at the time when data is being interpreted and we talk about patient value. That's where I hope that patients are involved. And I think we're not there yet. And that's a plan for the next couple of years. I think a lot of people have understood the concept, but putting this into practice, not only in an SOP, standard operating procedure, or in a process, or in, let's say, your mission statement, but really doing it on that study where the protocol needs to be submitted the next 4 weeks, and where you see kind of the timelines moving forward, that needs a thorough plan. And I really hope that we can work together to make sure this happens in all research that is being done. And I think a society like EHA has tremendous influence on that, because it's where the hematologists are, it's where the researchers sit, it's where industry meets, and so on. And by continuing that pathway where EHA has put the patient community across the program in different committees and so on, is the right pathway. But of course, more and more implementation is needed, that it really ends up in real trials that are patient-centric and delivering to the main patient's unmet needs.
What would be your takeaway message for patients that would like to get involved in patient advocacy?
If you're interested in science, if you're interested in supporting the patient community, if you're interested in addressing the unmet needs towards society, towards researchers, towards companies, get in touch with patient organizations. They're very strong organizations today. They always need help. They always need smart minds. They always need people that can actually contribute, because it's a tremendous amount of work. We have called for patient engagement for years. We need to fulfill the demand and get patient advocates into the committees doing the work. The more people we are, the less work is on each one's shoulder. But if you want to get involved, get in touch with a patient organization, patient community in your therapeutic area, in your disease, and they can guide you in where help is needed and where the exciting stuff happens in research. Because in the end, we're not only doing this because we want to help, we're also doing this because we want to feed our curiosity. And that's where research is really getting exciting. Just get in touch with the patient organizations.
Is there anything you would like to add?
No, I can just encourage everyone to have a collaborative spirit. Research only works if everyone contributes. And that requires sometimes you to take a step back from your own interests and try to find common ground, because everybody's got interests. Researchers want to develop studies. They want to proceed in their academic careers. They want to run research that really ends up at conferences like EHA and so on. And of course, the patient community has interests and industry has interests too. So it's very important to develop a collaborative spirit and work together and say, with my sphere of influence, what can I do? How can I make sure that we really deliver to patients' needs? It's your own job to do that. And that's my call.
Thank you, Jan, for this insightful conversation and for sharing your expertise with us. And if you like this podcast, please share it with your friends and see you in the next episode.
Thank you so much.